Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Yesterday was the 27th of June. Every year, when the calendar drags itself from June 26 into the accursed light of June 27, Zimbabwe's collective pulse quickens. Not with excitement, but with that dull, metallic thud a nation feels when its worst nightmare insists on an annual encore. This is no mere date. It's a sprawling graveyard masquerading as 24 hours. A carnival of ghosts that forces the country to replay an election horror movie it never bought tickets for. The usual chirps of dawn birds are replaced in memory by the crackle of burning hearts, the shrieks of families torn apart, and the smug applause of a regime convinced democracy is just a pesky suggestion from Geneva that can be drowned in any convenient river. June 27 is the day the ballot box lost its innocence, and the Constitution learned just how flammable paper can be when drenched in fear. Paul Mazore calls it Election Yebens, 27 June. Election of a mad person. Let's rewind if your stomach allows. March 29, 2008. An otherwise ordinary Saturday when millions marched to polling stations armed with nothing but stubby pencils and dangerous optimism. Against a backdrop of tattered campaign posters and promises so broken they were practically confetti, voters told Robert Mugabe, political fossil-in-chief, and his ZANU-PF entourage to go polish their medals elsewhere. Morgan Tsvangirai and the MDCT didn't just edge ahead. They thundered across the finish line in Technicolor, proving that the path to change could be lined with cast ballots instead of spent cartridges. Yet, for the revolutionary aristocracy in Harare, the idea of surrendering power ranked somewhere between voluntary dental surgery and sharing the remote. The generals plotted. The party elites hyperventilated, and suddenly post-election Zimbabwe felt less like a republic and more like a lion that had been poked one too many times. Snarling, wounded, and ready to maul anything wearing the wrong color t-shirt. Thus began the season of calibrated terror. Rural Mashonaland, Manicaland, and Mashingo morphed into outdoor laboratories where the state perfected the chemistry of pain. Mix 1 part militia, 2 parts state media propaganda, add a generous splash of impunity, then boil the whole concoction over the fire of political desperation. Green bombers sporting brand new machetes and hangdog loyalty sprouted like weeds across growth points. Soldiers lounged at beer halls, AK-47s casually probed against plastic chairs, distributing threats like complimentary peanuts. Whole villages were ordered to re-vote with their blood. Men forced to head neighbors into re-education camps. Women punished for marriages to the wrong political persuasion. Children commanded to serenade the tormentors with songs of praise for a government that had turned their playgrounds into mass graves in waiting. Somewhere in these provinces, hope was tied to a tree and methodically beaten until its bones snapped, then told to crawl back to Harare and bite its tongue. Terms like short sleeve, long sleeve were promulgated. Not for clothing, these were how you wanted your limbs to be cut. The crescendo arrived with the so-called runoff, a pageant so farcical it made banana republics blush. Imagine a heavyweight title match where one boxer is forced to fight blindfolded against a cement mixer, then fined for not showing up. Tsvangirai withdrew, correctly concluding that campaigning while alive was proving statistically difficult. And Mugabe strutted onto the ballot like a cat burglar returning to the crime scene, printing victory certificates before polling even opened. International observers, what few dared to enter, watched polling stations staffed by uniformed men who helpfully explained that privacy booths were unnecessary since everyone already knew the result. Ballot boxes bulged suspiciously even before sunrise, like suitcases at an airport carousel nobody bothered to claim. And in living rooms across the globe, crowds stared at Zimbabwe on the news, the way onlookers watch a slow-motion car crash, horrified, transfixed, and powerless to stop the inevitable crunch of metal and bone. To seal the spectacle, undercover footage from Buhera slipped through the internet's back alleys and slept the world awake. Grainy images captured burned homesteads smoldering under pink dawn clouds, villagers with swollen faces recounting nighttime visitations from men who called torture Operation Cleanup, and the blank stares of traumatized children who had discovered that monsters are real and they simply were fatigues. That video, spliced by brave journalists and smuggled past CIO checkpoints, screamed genocide on installment plan to every capital from Pretoria to Washington. Yet the wider world, knee-deep in its own recessions and Middle East misadventures, offered little more than pious press releases. Sanctions were tweaked, diplomats frowned, but the killing spree rolled on, lubricated by the knowledge that no cavalry was coming over the Limpopo with democracy kits and trauma counselors in tow. Mashonaland East, Mashonaland West, Mashingo, Manicaland seemed to be getting a message that says, when Matebeleland was affected, you were left out. Now it's your turn. June 27 itself landed like a sledgehammer. Across the country, polling queues looked more like hostage lines than civic gatherings. Voters headed forward by men with clipboards and casual menace, instructed to present ink-stained fingers like sacrificial offerings. By dusk, Mugabe's self-coronation was splashed across state television, complete with dense troops, ululations, and victory speech so steeped in alternate reality it ought to have come with spoiler alert. ZANU-PF had just forgotten that it takes a month to release the presidential elections, because that is exactly what it had taken for the previous result to be announced. However, this one was announced within 24 hours. Behind the podium glow, Emerson Mnangagwa, Constantino Chiwenga smiled the tight smiles of men who had engineered history with broken bodies and were now calculating interest on the investment. These were the kingmakers who would one day rename the dictatorship a second republic. As if slapping a fresh coat of paint on a haunted house would convince the occupants to ignore the dripping ceilings and midnight screams. But horror doesn't end when the credits roll. It lingers like a chemical spill. Survivors who limped away from the June violence carried more than scars. They howled around a daily question. Why did the neighbors turn into predators overnight? Farms abandoned after arson became overgrown memorials guarded by charred doorframes and silent chickens. Families searched morgues for missing fathers only to be told there were no records. That's bureaucratic shorthand for the system acting. Others stood in courtrooms seeking justice that never came because the very judges took notes on state-issued stationery. Even now, mention of June 27 in some rural bars can quieten an entire room faster than a power cut, as patrons glance at each other wondering who might still keep a militia t-shirt neatly folded under the mattress, just in case the old order calls for an encore. And yet, nations are stubborn. They heal in rugged increments, growing scar tissue over wounds no tribunal ever stitched. School children that were born after 2008 eye dusty playground flagpoles and whisper rumors about that awful year, piecing together history from grandparents' unfinished anecdotes. Young activists, undeterred by their elders' caution, harness encrypted messaging apps to circulate voter registration links, subversive acts disguised as emoji-littered memes. Ordinary citizens still queue for cooking oil, still dodge potholes deep enough to qualify as border checkpoints, but every election cycle they also smuggle a fresh ounce of defiance into conversations about the future. The machinery of repression remains, refurbished and digital, but the national memory of June 27 sits inside every punchline and protest song, daring tyrants to roll the dice one more time. So the date persists, chiseled into stone, woven into folk songs, floating like volcanic ash over every subsequent ballot. It insists that Zimbabwe keep telling and retelling the story, polishing its ugliness like a warning flare in the dark. June 27 teaches that tyranny often arrives draped in liberation credentials, brandishing old war photos as moral exemption slips. It reminds that generals rarely retire ideals of conquest, only uniforms. Most of all, it serves notice that a democracy measured solely by counting votes will always be outgunned by a dictatorship fluent in counting corpses. The true ballot is cast in the courage of citizens committed to remembering, refusing, resisting. Because forgetfulness, not opposition, is what dictators crave most. And if some still cradle nostalgia for the good old days, urge them to walk the back roads of Mondoro at dusk, to listen to the absent laughter from families erased in 2008. Ask them to sniff the air where bent thatch once coughed black smoke towards the indifferent stars. Then see if their revisionist romance survives the stench of vanished villages. June 27 does not accommodate denial. It shakes its chains and rattles history doors until even the willfully deaf feel the seismic rumble of the truth. Zimbabwe carries on. Markets opening, soccer matches debated, weddings celebrated under jacaranda blossoms, but beneath the surface hums a quiet oath, never again. Whether that oath can eclipse the vocabulary of violence depends on the next generation grasping why June 27 matters more than any single political brand. The question remains not whether the date will be remembered, but whether its lessons will be weaponized against future despots before machetes emerge from storage and propaganda waltzes across state television screens. So, let the world continue spinning and let the younger nations study their textbooks about heroic liberation struggles. Zimbabwe will keep its own footnote, June 27, where liberation's children mutated into jailers. Let preachers thunder about forgiveness and academics pass transitional justice. The soil still knows the names and the GPS coordinates of those who never came home. Let bureaucrats compose fresh constitutions. Tyrants never meet a clause they can't abduct in a midnight raid. And let any would-be strongman flick through Mugabe's dusty playbook. June 27 has already published the spoiler ending, complete with forensic photographs and eyewitnesses' testimony, stamped "Never Again" in ink that even censorship cannot bleach. Yet, hope is obstinate. It lingers like a stray cat on the doorstep, scratching until someone offers a saucer. Every election thereafter is a fresh day to the ruling class. Respect the vote or relive the nightmare. Each smartphone camera is a potential Buhera leak. Each tweet a digital flare. Each whistleblower a storyteller ready to upload tomorrow's proof before the black-booted brigade can confiscate the modern. Technology has tilted the stage. Perhaps not enough to guarantee justice, but enough to make secrecy feel like a luxury product dictators can no longer afford. In the afternoon, we carried a story about ZANU-PF threatening social media users. That is exactly the reason why ZANU-PF fears social media. Which brings the story back to its beginning and its never-ending relevance. June 27 is not logged in 2008. It is a temperate check, an early warning system buried under Zimbabwe's topsoil, ready to siren whenever rulers mistake fear for consent. It is the annual ghost insisting that the next time a politician waves the liberation flag to excuse fresh atrocities, the crowd will shout back, "The flag already has enough blood on it. Buy a new gimmick." It is the unblinking reminder that a nation's freedom heroes can transmogrify into its prison wardens if citizens pack away memory like last winter's court. Therefore, as the calendar cycles, pause to hear the echo of 2008. In the rattle of every ballot box, in the hush before each campaign rally, in the quiver of each pen hovering over an X. The date demands vigilance, not sentimental tears, courage, not hashtags, solidarity, not selective outrage. And it welcomes all who choose to remember, not to wallow in tragedy, but to forge armor from it, ensuring that when power next attempts to float on rivers of terror, the current of collective defiance will drag that ambition under. Ladies and gentlemen, let's remember 27 June. Let's remember the people who fell during that time. And let's all make a pledge that never again will we allow a government to terrorize us like it did in 2008. Zimwaves TV speaks the truth, not as an act of nostalgia, but as a public service announcement, a barbed lullaby, and a dare. Tyrants thrive on silence. Let them choke on the volume of remembrance. Subscribe now, ring every bell, smash every algorithmic gatekeeper, and help keep June 27 alive in the bloodstream of conscience. Because forgetting is how monsters reload, and remembering is how nations finally shoot down the darkness. Long live freedom. Long live democracy in Zimbabwe. I thank you.